Who's going to introduce me? Good morning. This is my first budget as Secretary of Defense, and as you know, the foundation for this budget was the QDR, a comprehensive analysis of our defense posture and strategies, policies, and programs. And the QDR examined the nature of our security threats and risks and opportunities that are facing the United States, both today and out to the year 2015. And it developed some far-reaching recommendations on strategy, force structure, readiness, modernization, and infrastructure. And then, of course, you're aware that last November, Dr. Hamre and I announced a sweeping reform of the Department's support activities and business practices. And this reform initiative, the DRI, seeks to bring the Department the best business practices and that U.S. corporations have used to become leaner, more agile, and highly successful. That the money that is saved by these initiatives will be especially crucial for funding the readiness and the future force. If I could have the first chart. As you're all aware that the essence of our new defense strategy is to shape the international environment in ways that are favorable to U.S. interests, and that includes the forward deployment of roughly 100,000 troops throughout the Asia-Pacific and also in Europe, with continuous carrier amphibious task force deployments. Also our engagement. We anticipate having the ratification debate on NATO enlargement. Our PFP exercises and the programs have been especially successful. We have the NATO-Russia Founding Act. We have a variety of bilateral and multilateral ties to Asia-Pacific. We also include within this threat reduction, and here I'm referring specifically to the non-Luger programs, which have been especially helpful in reducing the levels of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons in our relationship with the former Soviet Union. And this budget includes funds for forward deployment, engagement, and threat reduction. If I could have the next chart. Part of the QDR had to do with shaping the environment. The second component was responding to crises. And here, of course, we need to support the force structure that will allow us to respond to that full spectrum of crises, maintain a very high state of readiness, to streamline the support and the base structure. And critical to achieving this goal, of course, is reducing overhead burdens and to put that money into readiness and force structure. So it's critical that we have the kind of reduction in overhead that we currently have. If I could have the next chart. On the major readiness initiative, as we have said, readiness is a perishable commodity. Therefore, it's always at risk and requires constant and very careful attention. And so we're taking aggressive action to address key readiness issues, people. We've had a very high purse tempo. We are going to focus on new management systems to track unit deployments and to focus corrective action whenever they exceed certain thresholds. With respect to training, the budget maintains a very vigorous op tempo at the same rates that we've had in past years. And a critical area, of course, has been spares and maintenance. And with respect to that, we are including roughly $1 billion to address shortages in spares and maintenance so we can keep up our flying hours and also help reduce some of the backlog in the depot work. Overall, our operation and maintenance spending per troop is up. But again, high states of readiness require constant vigilance and money. If I could have the next chart, Tim. I touched upon this just briefly before, but in terms of our defense reform initiative, these are some of the business practices which we will be instituting in order to save as much money as possible and to accomplish a good deal of efficiency. We're going to reduce the size of OSD by some 33% over the next 18 months. We will see comparable reductions in other departments. We are going to re-engineer our business practices and go to a paperless contracting system. As I've pointed out to a number of you, we've had thousands of pages of financial regulations, some 70,000 pages in the past, and I've held them up for your benefit. We've reduced those down to a CD-ROM. By July of this year, we will have it completely on the internet. and by the year 2000, all of the major contracting will be done via the internet. So we're becoming a paperless society here in the Department of Defense. We are going to improve competition. We are going to put up 150,000 to 200,000 positions for competition. And what we found in the past, historically, that when there is competition, it usually breaks down about 50% of the time. The public facilities will win, and 50% will go to the private sector. But in any event, it usually results in about 20% of savings. So it's of great benefit. You get a high product at the best price, and it's the best deal for the American taxpayer. BRAC. We have to move forward to 2 new rounds of BRAC. And if I could have the next chart. I would like to point out the savings that we have been able to achieve from previous BRAC rounds. We have proposed the closure or realignment of 152 major installations and some 235 smaller ones. We have invested roughly $23 billion in that effort. We will net out by the year 2001 some $14 billion total for the savings that have been achieved through these previous 4 rounds. And then we will have recurrent annual savings of roughly $5.6 billion each and every year. We project that we have 2 more rounds. The DRI has recommended this. The National Defense Panel also has supported this very strongly, that we would have, after the costs are absorbed, we will have roughly $3 billion in additional savings. So this is going to be key to our being able to maintain high states of readiness and also to accomplish the goals that we have set for ourselves as far as the modernization program is concerned. If I could have the next chart. The contingency funding. Another key to maintaining readiness is to get prompt approval of congressional action to support a supplemental appropriation for contingency operations in both Bosnia and Southwest Asia. And to cover the unfunded fiscal 98 costs that are associated with extension in Bosnia and also the increased operations in Southwest Asia, the administration is going to be submitting an emergency non-offset supplemental. And the administration is also going to submit an emergency non-offset budget amendment to the budget to cover the fiscal 99 costs of the Bosnia deployment. And once again, I would take this opportunity to say that prompt approval of the supplemental will be key to our achieving the readiness levels that are necessary to keep our troops at the very highest states of capability, as well as achieve our modernization goals. If I could have the next chart. In preparing for the future, the third element of the QDR strategy, we need to achieve our modernization goals with all of the elements I've laid out in the past. We want to implement Joint Vision 2010. We intend to be able to respond to asymmetrical threats and to maintain high-quality personnel. If I could have the next chart. Just a word on modernization, which I think is this is a very important chart, because for years when the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs appeared before the Senate and the House on Capitol Hill, they would say that we had to get to approximately a $60 billion annual investment in new technologies and procurement, and yet the line kept going down. We now, under this budget, will be achieving our goal by the year 2001. We will hit the $60 billion figure. This year, I had pledged to the Congress in this budget that I would achieve a $49 billion amount. I fell a little bit short. It's 48.7, but it's pretty much on target in terms of where we have to be as far as investing for these systems in the future. And by the year 2000, we will have achieved our goal. Again, all of it is contingent upon getting the kind of savings that we anticipate out of BRAC in the years coming, as well as the Defense Reform Initiative. If I could have the next chart. In responding to the asymmetrical threats, we have provided for an increase of approximately $1 billion over the FYDP for the years fiscal 99 through the years 2003. We will establish a new agency for threat reduction, and as part of a broader effort, we're going to be calling upon the National Guard and our reserves to really focus upon the issue that I think is going to be with us for years to come in the future, and that is the prospect of terrorists possibly launching attacks in our urban centers and throughout the domestic United States. We are going to improve the quality and the ability to protect our critical infrastructure, and we are establishing a Defense Information Assurance Program, and that basically is to try to acquire as much integration of information that we can have in order to plan for protecting our information systems. Right now there are many, many programs underway at both the state level and the federal level. We need to be able to integrate that into a very coherent program. If I could have the next chart. This indicates our 050 account. And you can see, as I projected last year, that the defense budget is likely to remain flat. If you look at current dollars, obviously there will be a significant increase in terms of the inflationary factor involved there, but in terms of constant dollars, we're likely to see a very flat level of funding for the foreseeable future. All of this is significant because in the past, when we have gone to the Hill, members would ask, what would you like to have in addition to what is in the budget? And of course, each of the individual services have a number of things they would like to have and have submitted those answers to the members of Congress. I assume the same practice will take place today, and I don't seek to discourage that. But there must be an understanding that there are no additional add-ons coming this year or for the foreseeable future because you have the balanced budget agreement. And therefore, any add-ons into one service will necessarily come out of the hide of another service. And we have what we believe to be a very balanced program now, and members obviously would have an opportunity to make and suggest changes. And as long as those are done within what we believe the FYDP would require, I think then we can make appropriate adjustments. But it's, this chart is for the purpose of pointing out that there are unlikely to be any increases in the future, and we have to work within this balanced budget agreement. So in summary, the final chart, the balanced QDR strategy for SHAPE, Respond, and Prepare drives the Fiscal 99 program. Secondly, our readiness and force structure depend upon the DRI proposals to reduce overhead. Our modernization targets are online. They can be achieved. Joint Vision 2010 concepts will exploit the revolution of military affairs, and we need to treat people as our most important asset. I believe that some of you, if not all of you, have had a very detailed briefing in terms of the budget itself, but the comptroller is here, Bill Lynn is here to answer any specific questions on the budget, but I will entertain some questions in the next few minutes.
Mr. Secretary, I want to just briefly ask you about Iraq first, please. The Russians say this morning that Saddam Hussein has told their representative in Baghdad that he is now prepared to allow some access to 8 more presidential sites as long as the inspectors are accompanied by members of the five permanent members of the Security Council, but not complete access. How do you respond to that? Does that ease the situation at all in Iraq?
I don't think it really is a solution to the situation to say that 8 sites. I assume I'd have to see the statement. I have not read the statement. I assume that what the Russian delegate, I think he's a deputy foreign minister who is there, is suggesting is that all of the presidential sites but 8 would be open to full examination, full access by UNSCOM, and that the remaining 8 would also be open, plus there would be additional personnel who would accompany the inspectors should they determine to go in there. If that's the case, obviously that is something that we should look at, although I don't think it's a solution. What we're concerned about is that we not see UNSCOM politicized, that the people who are going into the sites are the ones who are the experts, and any attempt to politicize it by adding personnel who are not experts seems to me to be undermining the process. But it's something that we will look at. I don't think it's an appropriate solution at this time.
Also, sir, you said on Saturday, as you said repeatedly, that you expect or you believe that friends and allies in the Gulf, such as Saudi Arabia and other countries, will support any U.S. strikes on Iraq? What do you mean by support? Do you mean launch actual attacks or provide, say, AWACS basing, that kind of thing?
I mean that they will support whatever our military requirements would dictate, and that we would expect the full support of all of the Gulf states.
If Saudi Arabia or one of the other regional allies refused to allow offensive strikes to be conducted from their territory, would the United States still be able to conduct the kind of sustained bombing campaign that you threatened in the event diplomacy fails?
Let me repeat, I would expect all of the Gulf states to agree and support whatever military action needs to be carried out if the President should decide that is the case. No such decision has been made at this point. I would expect the full support of all the countries, and beyond that, I don't think I can comment.
Have you made a decision about whether you'll be traveling to the region?
Not yet, but we're processing your visas, and we'll keep you posted.
Mr. Secretary, are you personally convinced that gains can outweigh the political costs of a military action against Iraq? And I'm speaking specifically of the political costs in Saudi and Turkey that keep them from allowing us use of their bases. And secondly, is Saddam himself the problem, or is it his Ba'ath Party?
Well, as I indicated earlier, that I believe that the best solution is for the inspectors to have unfettered access to the sites they wish to inspect. That has been the policy announced and articulated by the UN Security Council. And as I repeat once again, I find it rather hard to accept the proposition that individual members cannot bring themselves to declare Saddam to be in material breach or significant breach of his obligation. I find it hard to fathom how they can seek to walk away from their own resolutions in terms of what he has done and what he has failed to do. So I think the best solution is to have UNSCOM on the ground. The President believes that, I believe that, the entire department believes that. I think our allies believe that. I also have indicated that the best way to achieve that goal is for the Security Council to remain united, to support strong condemnation. A resolution of support would be helpful. It's not mandatory. We think we have all the authority necessary to use military force if necessary. But we think that that would be a helpful step in persuading Saddam. He has not been successful in dividing the Security Council, which has been his goal. Whether or not it is Saddam himself or those of his party who support him, I think we're not in a position to make a judgment as to whether or not it is he himself. I think it's fair to say that others would be less effective in marshaling whatever support he has within his country to pose the kind of threat that he does to his neighboring countries.
Should he be a target?
Our policy is not to target Saddam Hussein, but to seek to curtail his ability to manufacture and continue to reconstitute his weapons of mass destruction, or also pose a threat to his neighbors.
Mr. Secretary, you were reviewing some further additions to round out force in the Gulf. Have you made any of those decisions yet?
Not yet, no. And this is typical of any type of military consideration. There are always refinements, additions, and changes, and I simply have to take more time to review them.
Mr. Secretary, are U.S. forces in the Gulf receiving any kind of inoculation, as some troops did in 1990, against biological weapons that Iraq may throw at them?
Not at this time. I think the answer is no.
Why is that?
Well, we have planned to have a major inoculation program, but to begin it in the spring after all of these certifications from FDA and others certify that the materials that we have, the vaccines that we have, are safe, stable, and have their effective potency.
Have they received the new lightweight protective suits yet?
I don't believe those are in the field just yet.
Mr. Secretary, I'm wondering why your administration has decided to terminate the FMS military program to Greece in such a crucial period for her security, since Greece is facing an imminent invasion by Turkey in the Aegean.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you're asking about.
Why have you decided to terminate the FMS military program to Greece?
I believe perhaps I have not focused specifically on the FMS program for Greece, but we have very good relations with Greece and with Turkey, I might add. As a matter of fact, the Vice Chairman is meeting with them at this time. So we hope that their relationship will be a positive one. We're trying to work out their differences of opinion dealing with Cyprus and other issues. But we have a very good program relationship with Greece as well as Turkey.
Mr. Secretary, have you ruled out the use of tactical nuclear weapons in order to destroy deep, hardened targets in Iraq? And what would Saddam Hussein have to do to invite a possible nuclear response from the United States?
Jamie, are you going on this trip? Were you going on this trip? Our policy.
Because there are serious people discussing whether or not the United States would consider using nuclear weapons, and so I would just like to get your
Our
perspective.
policy has not changed. As President Bush, prior to President Clinton, indicated that any use of chemical or biological weapons against us or our allies would be met with a very vigorous, devastating response. And beyond that, I wouldn't comment.
Mr. Secretary?
Tom.
She asked my question.
Okay.
Yeah, can you bring us up to date on whether or not you're yet reviewing any requests from Israel for either protective gear like antidotes or masks, and the status of offering them information on missile attack warning?
Obviously, we would cooperate very closely with Israel on all of these issues should it be warranted. Should there be any decision to resort to military force, we would be operating in very close contact with the Israelis to make sure that they receive whatever cooperation we can provide.
How about a budget question?
You're breaking the rhythm of it.
You mentioned in your brief the $1 billion to go towards readiness, especially spare parts, shortages, and maintenance. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is there some things sort of in particular that stand out, have
Yes.
stood out over the last several months that have forced you to make such a
There are some backlogs as far as the Navy Depot work is concerned, which these funds will be directed toward, as well as to engine repair and part replacement for Air Force. There will be included some pilot retention type of benefits. But the Air Force, as well as Navy aviators as well, and Marines, there is a problem across the board, more serious as far as the Air Force is concerned in terms of pilot retention, and that of course impacts upon status of readiness. So we're trying to address that by again looking at purse tempo rates for pilots, trying to get more of a rationalization of the program so they're not overutilized, to take into account stresses placed upon their families and themselves. But that it cuts across the board. But it's roughly $1 billion that's directed towards spare parts, engine repairs, replacements, and pilot retention.
You want more bases closed with 2 more rounds of BRAC. Is there a way to state how many bases, major installations you feel must be shut down in 2 more rounds? You've given it as a monetary figure. Do it as a specific number of bases.
Well, that would really be up to a BRAC commission. The BRAC commission would be set up by Congress with certain guidelines as to what factors would have to be taken into account. But I can't give you a specific list, nor would I give you a specific list of items. I can show, and we will show in some detail, in terms of if you look at the number, for example, of submarines that we had during the height of the Cold War and the number of submarines that we have and will have under the QDR goals, there is a substantial reduction in the numbers of subs. There is not a substantial reduction in pier space. If you look at the numbers of aircraft that we had during the height of the Cold War, you will see a substantial reduction in those numbers. there has not been a comparable reduction as far as the bases are concerned. So you need to have a greater reconciliation of what we have in the way of force structure with what we have in infrastructure. And you can go down systematically and make those kind of comparisons, but I wouldn't be in a position to say which specific or how many bases need to be closed. That would be the determination of the BRAC Commission.
Sir, can I ask a follow-up to that? How likely is it this time around Congress will go along with it? And do you really want to go back to Maine in the next century with and look at, say, Kittery and Brunswick being shut down?
How likely is it? I think that the Congress has, excuse me, to face up to its responsibilities as well. During my confirmation hearing last year and during the presentation of the budget, I pointed out that all of the easy choices have been made, that Congress has a co-equal role, a co-equal responsibility here. All I can do as Secretary of Defense say, here is our best analysis. This is what we need to achieve this kind of a balanced force in the future. These are the kinds of reductions that are imperative. Now, if Congress decides not to undertake 2 more BRAC rounds, then it will choose to say that we're going to carry that excess infrastructure, which means that we will impact upon readiness or we will impact upon modernization. They will have to make that choice as well as I have made that choice. So it's up to them working with us. If they choose not to do so, then they will have to accept the responsibility for it, that they are going to send our sons and daughters into harm's way in the future with less than the best equipment, the most sophisticated that we can develop for the future, and with less states of readiness. If they're prepared to do that, I think they have to be prepared also to accept the responsibility for it. So I'm going to present it in terms of responsibility. It would apply to Maine as it would to California, to any other state. We all have a national security interest in protecting, and so it should be applied across all of the 50 states.
So in hitting the procurement goal, what were you able to do this time that eluded your predecessors?
Well, what we were able to do is to have some savings, and obviously I had some some end strength reductions. We also were able to cut back on some of the previous levels of procurement. I reduced, for example, the F-18 E&F model from 1,000 to 548. I reduced the profile of that procurement rate so as to achieve some savings. I cut back one wing on the F-22 Raptor. We cut back the total number of V-22s for the Marine Corps, but accelerated the buy. We were able to achieve some substantial savings through that method, and that's one of the reasons we were able to achieve that.
Well, that proposes a question, which is that the Army seems cranked off about this budget in a way I haven't seen them before. They say that if it's a balanced budget, it's been balanced on the back of the U.S. Army. What do you say to that?
If that is the case, it is news to me. I have been working very closely with General Reimer. He has worked with me through the QDR process. I have met with the chiefs for many times on many occasions during the past year. I have yet to hear any of the chiefs indicate that they felt that their ability to carry out their mission was being undermined by the QDR process. And so I think you're always going to have some disagreement on the part of members within services saying it's not enough for their service. But as far as the chiefs are concerned, as far as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is concerned, both Shawley and who preceded General Shelton, they strongly support this budget.
Is the billion-dollar add-on in O&M an acknowledgement that you are starting to have difficulty meeting the training hours, that you are having difficulty keeping the spare bins full, ammunition full, training hours flying, shooting tanks, all of those things have been dropping because of your shortage of O&M?
I think it's fair to say that, that it's impossible to maintain a static level of readiness throughout all of the services at every given moment, that sometimes readiness will decrease by virtue of overseas deployments, high operational tempos, things that are going on in the Gulf right now, extensions in various areas, including Bosnia. All of that requires a much more sophisticated systems management. To the extent there have been shortages, yes, we recognize there have been some shortages. When those shortages are called to our attention, we also have to have a better reporting mechanism so that I become aware of it and the JROC becomes aware of the requirements earlier so we can address them and make changes during the course of the year. But it does recognize that we need to put more into our readiness accounts in order to replace those deficiencies.
Does it not also acknowledge the changing threat, that the threat is not a monolithic Soviet threat, and therefore you don't need to be at the kind of readiness level you might have needed when you were feared the Fulda Gap might be full of Soviet tanks?
Well, we have a different type of threat today, which in many ways is equally, if not as challenging, more challenging. That is by virtue of the instability that we see in the world today, by virtue of the tensions in the Gulf, those in Korea, what we're seeing take place in various parts of the world. We have different types of challenges which require a higher operational tempo than we've had before. So it's it's a question of calibrating the nature of our operations and purse tempo with the kinds of threats that are evolving. And so in some cases it's more challenging because it's more manifold in nature. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, you repeated the litany that people are our most important asset, and yet your budget takes $1.1 billion away from military construction and family housing, when every one of the services has backlogs in base repairs and new construction they need, and family housing is one of the needs in most of the services.
Well, some of the military construction funding, as I recall, is going into some of the housing programs. What we're trying to do with respect to housing is to really leverage the private sector into to dealing with this problem. We have roughly 375,000 units of housing, both domestically and internationally, approximately 2/3 of which are in need of repair and rehabilitation. It will take us a number of years in order to achieve that rehabilitation goal. What we're doing now through a program that has been authorized by Congress is to find ways in which we can leverage private sector, either lending, investment, equity types of holdings, and to utilize their dollars in ways that give us about a 3-to-1 ratio. So even though the dollars are coming down, they're being used in a different fashion, which will accelerate the rehabilitation of those units rather than having a 3 or 4 times as much it would be required as an appropriation. So we're doing it differently today, and we're doing it, we think, better and more efficiently.
Time for one more question, Brian, and then Bill Lynn will take questions on the budget.
Your budget, Mr. Secretary, allocates $3.2 billion for 30 additional superhornets. Some of your staff has said that before that actually happens, before that money is given to the contractor, that you want to certify that this wing drop problem is a fix for that is identified. Can you talk a little bit about your confidence in the Navy in fixing that, and also what happens if you don't certify a fix? Do you cancel the program? Do you?
First thing to do is fire the staff members who've been talking to you. Anyone over here? No. The problems that have been identified with the F-18 E&F model, we believe, can be corrected with very marginal costs involved. It would not require a wing redesign. That some of the changes that I've looked at, the 3 approaches that have been suggested by a very distinguished panel. A panel was selected, Dr. Hamry was the individual in charge of forming a blue ribbon panel to look at this. Distinguished scientists and those very well experienced in the field of aerodynamics. They have come up with 3 proposed changes which are very marginal in nature, which they believe either together or in a solitary fashion will be able to correct the problem. There will be no release of an additional 30 aircraft until I'm satisfied that that wing drop problem has been corrected.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bill Lynn is here for additional answers to your questions.
You did it right the first time.
Do you have any
exhausted yourself with questions on the budget, I'm happy to.
I have a question.
Sure.
You guys are requesting two non-offset supplementals. That's, I mean, traditionally, Congress always wants a rescission with a supplemental in order of the same amount. And in the past, you've had, you know, some currency adjustments in that NRO money that you could take to use for this. That's gone. So what's going to be the pitch to actually get a non-offset supplemental?
Couple of things. One, I mean, we don't think the balanced budget agreement really anticipated those costs, so they were done in an allowance. They're in the federal budget, but they're not in the defense budget. Which leads to the second point, which is the most important. We think that you need to be able to pay for those in another place in the budget in order to protect the modernization goals that we hit in '99 and maintain the high state of readiness with the increases in op tempo and spares. That is crucial that be a non-offset supplemental. We think it's crucial to maintaining the integrity of the policy.
Basically, if you're telling them if they force you guys to offset, or if they do it themselves, they're going to break the modernization program as you've devised it?
I wouldn't use that phrase, but you're going to force some very difficult trade-offs. There's no question.
Does the same go for add-ons? You know, the one-to-end list, the notorious.
Well, I think that's what the Secretary was saying earlier about a zero-sum budget, is that when we're working within the constraints of the balanced budget agreement with the number that's allocated to defense, that if you add in one area, it's going to force a reduction in another area, and that's different than the past couple of years where Congress has indeed shifted resources into defense. Within the balanced budget agreement, they wouldn't be able to do that, so you'd be in a zero-sum kind of situation. Yes, sir.
Forecast about a 25% increase in procurement between the '99 budget this year and the '01 budget in 2 years, from about 48 some odd billion to about 60.
I think that's about the right number, yeah.
25% increase.
I think it's a little bit more than that. I think it's 27 or 28, but that's about right.
Where's that money coming from?
It's coming from the other QDR changes, basically, the force structure and some of the changes that predated the QDR, the base closures from the prior rounds have generated savings that, as the Secretary said, start to hit steady state in '01, so some of those savings. There are some force reductions in the QDR, 60,000 active end strength and equivalent number of reserves are coming out, and even 80,000 civilians coming out of the overhead accounts. In addition to that, there is some shift out of the R&D account. That really is more the normal phasing as you move programs from development into production. There's a down cycle in terms of R&D, which then goes back up as the next generation. But the combination of those things are what get us up to 60.
So you feel confident about making that increase of about 25% in 2 years?
I want to be cautious, but I'm encouraged that we hit the first marker on the journey, which is the 49 in '99. This is going to continue to be difficult, and then we're going to have to work it very hard. We worked it very hard in this budget. We won't be able to let up in the next two.
One last follow-on, if I could. Can you give us just a backdrop of where the procurement budget level has been for the last few years? What's the low that we looked at in recent years going into this year's target?
It should be in some of the backup material. I don't. It's around 40, but I don't have the exact number in my head. Yes, sir.
Of the total O&M requests, can you break out how much of that is mission-related versus infrastructure? Because in '96, I guess it was 59% infrastructure versus 41% mission-related.
I think that was the total budget. If you're looking at some GAO figures there, is that what you've?
That's O&M.
Just O&M.
Yeah.
I've seen those figures for the total budget, but I don't have a break yet of what the '99 O&M budget would have in that kind of infrastructure versus forces yet.
Just to be clear on the O&M, the $1 billion that the Secretary talks about, that is in addition to what was originally planned, correct? And obviously that's not the total O&M budget.
Yeah. I think the way to look at it is that if you looked at the '99 column of the '98 budget, you would see more than $1 billion added, and that was for purse tempo, for op tempo, for spares, for maintenance. You wouldn't compare the '98 column to the '99 column because you have different end strengths and a series of things. But if you compare the '99 column in the last year's budget and the '99 column in this year's budget. Thanks.